Good evening. Hey, Dr. Varden, Justin, how are
Hello,
you?
hello.
Hello and good evening. Well, I'm on the East Coast, so it's evening for me.
As am I. I know, Justin, you're on the other side of the country.
Yeah,
So good afternoon.
early
Good afternoon.
afternoon.
And a good day and afternoon and evening to everyone else who's joining us this evening. Guys, this is one of my favorite topics. I don't know about you, but I'm excited to talk about this the role of genetics and supplementation and navigating supplementation in general. It's one of the number one questions that I get and have gotten in my 25 plus year career. How about you guys?
Constantly.
So I
Yes.
suppose maybe one of the best directions we can take in this webinar tonight is to get as heavy into the questions as we possibly can rather than float and navigate through our own agenda. Of course, we do want to cover certain things, starting perhaps with, again, the understanding genetic variability. This is what we do best at the DNA company, without belaboring the point because it's personalized medicine. We're all N of one now. It's no longer one size fits all. And here's I think what would just out of the gate drive this message home for the majority of people that are tuning in. Besides ages and stages, because I feel like some companies have gotten good at this messaging, like there's like the silver multi, and then there's like the general, and then there's the pediatric. And okay, so fine. But why would you ever give the same amount of an active ingredient to a 140-pound female as you would to a 210-pound male? This irks me to no end. And that's just tip of the iceberg stuff when we're talking about, sort of, one stop shop or a, one size fits all. But I'd love to go over to you first, Dr. Varden, and just sort of for the group, give us your top line as it relates to how genetics influence individual nutrient requirements and metabolism. How do we look at these micronutrients and macronutrients for that matter? But the focus today is
Yeah.
micronutrients through supplementation.
Well, I think that genetics really is the starting point. That is the blueprint to find out how does your body metabolize, process, transport these nutrients, micronutrients that are so very important. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean just because your genetics say, oh, okay, maybe you don't transport zinc very well, with our SLC30A8 gene. Doesn't mean that you are zinc deficient necessarily. That is something that we have to look into, based on symptoms, based on presentations, based on, actual labs. But that gives us a clue into saying, oh, let's take a look at these other things. Have they been issues in the past? If so, well, then we really need to zone in on this because your genetics states such. But just like our genetics do not determine or say we have a disease, it's not diagnostic. It just tells us where to focus our energies.
Right. Right. So this is the concept that, genes might be the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. I think one of the easiest analogies I've ever drawn from this when it comes to genetics and environment and micronutrients is vitamin D. So I love your zinc analogy and some of the genes we test for. We also, of course, dive deep into vitamin D and look at 3 or 4 genes specific to vitamin D. And often find that people run high risk genetically for becoming low. But often, if they're not living north of 40, where the three of us live at different parts of the northern North America, you know, where we live north of 40 predisposes us to lack of sun. So that's number one. But how our genes dictate how we're going to absorb, distribute, and of course, engage in vitamin D is the bigger question. And then supplementation, the right kind. You're no longer going to use vitamin D2. We all know vitamin D3 is the most important supplement. How often do you use that throughout the day? And then testing not just your genes, but your endpoints, your blood markers for 25-OHD to determine how what you're doing informed by genetics is going to work for you. So it's quality, it's predisposition, environment where you live, north or south of, let's call it 40 degrees, And of course, the format of that vitamin D. I mean, would you agree with that statement, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the way I look at it is that genes are kind of the upstream of the upstream, right? The genes encode the enzymes tell the cells how to do the job, right? So every gene represents a job that need be done. What actually ends up in the cells of your body is the downstream of the downstream, right? The manifestation after all these processes have taken place. And I think that's where supplementation really comes in, because it's really crazy that somehow in the West, we've managed to simultaneously be overfed and yet malnourished at the same time. I don't know how we pulled that off, but yeah, when we have, nutrient deficient soil, and we live in areas that don't have a heck of a lot of sunshine for several months out of the year, we can kind of zoom out and look at our genes and look at what's required and do the blood work and stuff necessary as well. But it's an upstream versus downstream thing with a lot of that kind of stuff. Vitamin D as well. I mean, we know that you need to be pairing it with K2. And you may have a genetic predisposition to calcify a lot of your cholesterol in a bad way. And if you overdo vitamin D, not knowing that you have, let's say, an ApoE3/4, you can cause additional calcification and actually cause cardiovascular issues just from not knowing what your genes were. And you're like, here I am taking a heck of a lot of vitamin D, but the way you did it was suboptimal. So you can actually cause problems if you supplement incorrectly as well.
Right. Unpack that for us, Dr. Varden, the impact of genetic variations on chronic diseases, just like cardiovascular disease, because Justin's just opened a can of worms there. So how do we look at this?
Yes, he
and
did.
then the micronutrient factors, because I mean, what we're unwrapping here, just in that one statement that you're going to do at this point. So floor is yours, but we're talking about methylation, detoxification, endothelial lining, and then some of those very specific types, qualities, and dosages of the micronutrients that happen to solve, or not solve, but prevent and even maybe treat predisposition to cardiovascular disease.
Well, absolutely. And this works into what I was saying, that, okay, your genes are your base blueprint. They are what we have to work with, but it truly comes down to how are they being expressed? This is into the epigenetics, and this works into nutrigenetics. It's like, okay, so the food you're taking in, first of all, are you taking in the right forms? Is there a way, how do your genes use that information? Because really, nutrients are information, and they create a cascade of effects in the body of making other genes be expressed, or, allowing certain, different cytokines, or, anti-inflammatory markers, or all of these different things. It really comes down to what you're putting into your body, what you are taking in, and how is that working. So you were saying about methylation, and I saw in the chat that, people still have questions on methylation. How does this work? Well, methylation, the vitamins that are often, associated with that are your B vitamins. Now, obviously, there are more things going on, but let's focus on the B vitamins, because in our methylation pathway, with the genes that we look at, and we look at, 5-6 different genes in that pathway, that, first of all, we can see how well are your enzymes working to be able to process these methyl groups and to work through this process. But B9 is a big, B vitamin that's very important in this pathway. And one of the genes that we look at, the SHMT1 gene, this can tell us what type of B9, also called folate, that is best for you. Also, B12, another big B vitamin that's very, very important. So we are looking at your MTR gene, that informs us what form. Can you handle a methylated form? Should you have an adenosylated form? And how is that going to work? Not just that, but is this something that, do you absorb in the gut? Do you do that okay with your B vitamins? Or is it something that you need sublingual? So this works into the FUT2 gene to let us know. So your genetic blueprint is extremely valuable into informing us the best way, not just the types of supplements, B vitamins in this case, that you should be taking, but how they should be taken.
Right. And perhaps we should have started this way. But this does require, in my opinion, a little bit of revisiting nomenclature or, some of the vernacular that we're used to using, because supplement for most of us in our minds tends to represent, I've got gaps in my diet that I need to replace so that I don't get deficient. Genetics considered, genomic pathways considered, we're often, for the majority of what we're talking about here, is not replacing nutritional gaps. We want to satisfy for those first and foremost, but this is, as you described, the two of you format, and also we often can't, even through diet, eat ourselves to therapeutic intervention. So what we need are ingredients or supplements that will go beyond the measure to replace gaps in our diet, but at therapeutic range. So not pixie dusting a tiny bit of often the wrong ingredient into our diets. And of course, in some instances, doing more harm than good, right? I mean, so to that end, as Dr. Varda just described, Justin, using the wrong type of folate, what's that going to do for us?
So if you were to, let's say, require a pre-methylated folate just based on your genes, like Dr. Varden mentioned, and you take one that doesn't have the methyl group, it's not going to substitute and support that area of your methylation cycle properly. So you're still going to end up with a suboptimal overall methylation cycle. Reminding everyone that we look at the efficacy of the whole thing. On the flip side, were you to not require the methylation group and you went ahead and took a methylfolate, a methyl B9, you can actually over methylate. That's a thing as well. You can overload the cytoplasm with more methyl groups than you can handle, and that can cause some kind of cellular havoc and inflammation and things. So that's why I'm not the biggest fan of like just taking an arbitrary B complex, for example, like just buying a B complex. Maybe all of the things in there are methylated, and it's almost like you just took SAMe or something, like you've just donated a whole bunch of methyl groups that your methylation cycle didn't genetically need, and you can overdo it in that respect as well. So you can both over and under methylate. That can cause all kind of other issues, right? We want it to be efficient, and we don't want to over or underdo it. So once again, your genes are going to encode the methylation cycle, so we can do it on a personalized level.
And so we've asked a poll this evening, as we normally do. We're going to get into those results momentarily, but I know a lot of people think, I'm already exercising, I'm eating clean, whatever that means. I think that's a misnomer. I maintain a balanced lifestyle, I sleep perhaps pretty well, and I take a multi. But what we're saying is it's so important to delve deeper into the reasons you might want to offset your genetic susceptibilities, because that's what these are. They don't always immediately out of the gate, year one, translate into issues, diseases, or, symptoms. But with targeted ingredient supplementation, even if you lead a healthy life, there are several, I guess, areas, silos, factors to consider. And we report on all of them. So there are the letter vitamin deficiencies, the nutrient deficiencies many of us are predisposed to have. And again, right away in the beginning of life, we don't necessarily express them. Sometimes our diets offset them slightly, but we have genes that demand for more of a particular vitamin, mineral, an ingredient. I mean, herb, you can't have a deficiency in an herb, but an herb might dial up or dial down a hormonal pathway that we investigate, or maybe an amino acid. We look at the executive function. We're very proud of how we look at mood and behavior. Mental upset disorders, imbalances are very much epidemic these days. Sometimes just using amino acids up or down regulate our ability to experience better mood. So other natural ingredients. I mean, there's a long list of things that our diets could never provide, let alone enough of or in the right format that your genes inform. So, and then again, like we can throw into this mix modern agricultural practices, nutrient depleted soils. And the list is quite long. These deficiencies, really impact not only your overall health, but of course, hormone imbalance, detoxification, methylation, you guys just unpacked, all of this for the body's proper functioning. So in the poll, we asked, to begin anyways, how confident are you in your current supplement routine? And it was all the way from very confident to somewhat confident to not confident. And then I don't take supplements, maybe a multivitamin. No, 0% of people said that. So people are supplementing, and that's what actually the Nutrition Business Journal that reviews, at least in North America, a lot of these facts and figures suggest everyone's supplementing, many with the wrong kinds. That's why we're talking about this tonight. But the biggest 70% of people said somewhat confident. I take supplements, but I'm not sure they're the right ones. We're talking to you guys tonight. This is exactly what we're going to cover. You know, I think I'd like to just sort of throw into this before we continue the conversation around how we investigate and then some of the chronicities we're experiencing as a society. So sleep, mood and behavior issues, hormonal dysregulation, methylation dysregulation, detoxification, upset, et cetera. At the DNA company, when we formulate with our ingredients that are informed by thousands of genetic reports, we have a criteria, and it's elegant. And I wouldn't say it's super simple, but it's elegant. The way we decide which ingredients are going to work for individuals and which formats, we call this a STEP, STEP. It's an acronym, which is really our steps that we use to qualify for ingredient use, because there's so many on the market, and a lot of them are really bogus, and a lot of them really just don't do what they say they're going to do through safety and efficacy. So number one, S. So this is, by the way, STEP squared. So STEP, twice over. 2 S's, 2 T's, 2 E's, and 2 P's. Safety and sustainability. So obviously safety is our top priority. All of our products, that is to say ingredients and our formulations, are naturally sourced. They're certified GRAS, which is generally recognized as safe. So safe for human consumption. So that's number one. Saving the planet, I think it sits high on our agenda, and we believe it should sit high on everyone out there as well. I mean, if you're not taking care of Mother Nature, I mean, what's the point in general long term? So, a forest of sustainable trees, grown for lumber is relatively easy to visualize, while maybe sustainable vitamin D, that takes maybe a little bit more imagination, but we have this strict safety and sustainability. Then there's traceability and transparency. So all of our ingredients, we know farm to finish. They're NSF or informed choice. They're certified like safe for sport, no, artificial flavors, colors, etc. These things that ultimately affect those of us who are sensitive and have detox problems to begin with, which is why you guys are actually, asking for help in the first place. Then evidence and efficacy. So every single ingredient we offer is evidence-based, has to have the proof, the science, the literature to confer health benefits. And purity and potency. We're not pixie dusting. There's no tiny amount of an ingredient just to put it on the label. And we're free from a bunch of stuff. Allergens, again, as I mentioned, preservative, dyes, flow agents, dairy, gluten. And as much as we can become free from, we're free from. So purity is there and potency is there. And then, so we also asked, are you currently taking supplements for any of the following? And it's a pretty split divide, with maybe dietary supplements and microbiome support as the leading, but just by a margin. So detox, sleep, microbiome and dietary, vitamin deficiencies. What are, guys, this is the big discussion now for the chronicities. Maybe over to you, Dr. Varden. What are we doing for detoxification, and how do we do what we do?
Well, when we talk about detoxification, this is really a nuanced thing, I should say. Number one, it is supporting the detoxification pathways, especially the ones that we look at and test for in our reports. Specifically, that would be your methylation pathway, which we've already talked about. The glucuronidation pathway, which actually is focused a little bit more in the hormones section of your reports. Also, glutathione conjugation. This glutathione is your master antioxidant of the body. Very, very important. So this would be the GST genes. So when you look at your, it's marked as glutathionization. So you'll see that in the anti-inflammation system of the reports. And the last one being your antioxidation. This works with the SOD2 and GPX. These are really important because this directly affects your mitochondrial health, the functioning of your mitochondria, because it is what helps to break down and remove the oxidants that build up in the cell and can cause aging and other, inflammatory factors, other problems. So these are the main detoxification pathways that we look at. And then by looking at your report, seeing, okay, where are you weak? Where do you need a little support? We also look at where you're strong. This is really important because we want to lean in on where you may be strong. But then saying, okay, for the places that you're weak, what is it that you need? Obviously, looking toward food first, then supplementation, but seeing we're talking about supplementation tonight, what specific compounds are necessary? Like we said, B vitamins for methylation. Looking at things like N-acetylcysteine, selenium, alpha-lipoic acid, also your other amino acids that make up glutathione, because that glutathione is made up of 3 amino acids: glycine, glutamate. Oh goodness, I just blanked.
Cysteine.
Cysteine, thank you. Yeah, that's where you get N-acetylcysteine. So these 3 are necessary. Are you getting them in your diet? Are you getting them, in the things that you are taking in? So again, this is how we support your detoxification pathways. When we start getting into, oh, you've got other things going on, you've got heavy metal toxicity, or you have parasites, or that's another aspect that we have to deal with. That we use your genes, we use that information, we support the detoxification pathways, but in those cases, you may need some extra therapeutic help. Short-term, relatively short-term, focus. But that, again, that's more of nuance, that's more personalized. This is where working with a practitioner, with one of us in the program would really benefit you. So, but again, that's kind of opening up its own can of worms, pun intended.
Well, and second to detoxification, we said we'd look at sleep, and
Right.
Sleep is, of course, having laid the groundwork, at least top level, guys. I mean, we can't get into the nuanced nitty gritty of everything this evening. We want to get into certain ingredients and talk about why we use them, but talk about genetics, methylation, detoxification. So to focus on, this other area critical to health, and that's sleep. Because patterns and quality, of course, are also impacted by genes. So have us understand why and how, Justin, because you can select supplements that specifically support better sleep depending on your circadian rhythm, mood and behavior. And that not only helps you to wake up, feel refreshed, and tackle the day ahead, this is like balancing the primary brain center hormones before we start talking about all the other downstream sort of steroidal hormones, I suppose. So it starts with sleep, right?
Yeah, it has to, because that's one of the main pillars of all of your health. That's when all of your recovery happens. That's when a lot of your detox happens. That's when we get this rising of the anabolic hormones, and it restores your cells in various ways. My whole point with supplements is that they're among the plethora of strategies that I'm going to implement once I know what the issue is. Right. So if you have a sleep problem, supplements are going to be one of the things that I recommend on top of the lifestyle behaviors. Right. We're going to go in and be logical. We're going to remove the things that are obviously disrupting your sleep, because you're guzzling water right before bed and you're on your phone with the blue light. We're going to start there. The lifestyle behaviors, we're going to remove those. And then we're going to add in positive habits. Right. You're going to get some red light glasses. You're going to stop with the Netflix, etc. Then the supplements come in as the complement to all of that. If we know what the issue is by looking at, let's say, your mood and behavior profile, maybe it's a dopamine problem. Maybe you're just, wired to be addictive or binging. We see that a lot. People that have these binging tendencies, they can't just watch one Netflix episode. They got to do the whole season in one night. That's going to be a problem for your sleep. So let's put some strategies in place to kind of counteract the dopaminergic side of what's disrupting your sleep. Maybe it's on the noradrenaline pathway. Maybe you're a really anxious type of an individual, and we need to work on calming you down prior to bed, getting that fight or flight system kicked off. And we can do that in a number of ways, journaling and, acupuncture mats. There's a million ways that we can attack that. Maybe it's BDNF. Maybe it's your satiety signals. You just can't stop thinking about food. On and on we go. So I always start with the genes, because remember, each gene represents your factory setting for this job. If this job has a downstream effect of impacting you in this way, and in 2024, your gene encoding is making it so that your sleep is disrupted, we need to look at the problem, and then we work backwards from the problem, and we'll place our interventions. Maybe it's an ashwagandha. Maybe it's an L-theanine. Maybe it's a CBD. Maybe it's a combination of a bunch of them, but we always have to start with what those factory settings are, because DNA is the upstream of the upstream for the problem.
Right. Okay. So in question 2 in the poll, when we're saying, are you currently taking supplements for any of the following? The number one, so we just covered detox and sleep to some degree. The number one answer was dietary supplements / microbiome support. I have a thought. Number 3 question was, would you be interested in trying a custom compounded supplement based on your DNA? Where the number one question, or the number one answer to this, is maybe I need to learn more first. And number 4 is, what's the biggest challenge you face when choosing supplements? And the number one question, or the number one answer here, is it's hard to tell if supplements are making a difference. So let's tackle these 3 all at once. Here's my thought in context of the microbiome, because I think it would be really helpful for folks to understand, how do we even use the concept of genetics to inform how we can actually, to some degree, crystal ball that individuals might have a challenge with upset microbiome. 2, what do we consider as the ingredients that we would want to maybe put into or help with this microbiome? And then 3, how do we even know that these things are working? Dr. Varden, you want to set that off? It's a big one, but let's go through this in context of microbiome. Because it's a perfect example as to how to answer kind of all 3 of these, and then we can get into individual questions.
Okay, so let's hit upon a few genes that we specifically look at when it comes to the microbiome. And one of them in particular is a glutathione conjugation gene that I had mentioned earlier. It's the GST M as in Mary 1. This gene is very important. It deals with the breakdown and removal of xenobiotics, of other toxins, and really does a lot of work in the guts, in the biome of the gut and lungs. So this, along with the FUT2 gene, this one you will see in your methylation pathway. Remember I had mentioned about, do you absorb B12 in the gut, well or not? Well, the FUT2 gene is also very important when it comes to the anchoring of the microbiome, these bacterium and food. How well are you doing it? And it's really interesting, though, because the particular variants between the FUT2 gene, you can have an AA, you can have a GG, you can have an AG, and it's not like it's one is good, one is bad. They have different things, because it's kind of like a double-edged sword for the FUT2 gene, because if you have the GG version, then you are not absorbing your B12 from your gut into the bloodstream very well. But with the GG version, that's actually really good when it comes to microbiome. So it's that, play off of, can be good for one, not so good for the other. So these are definitely areas that we look at. But excuse me, we're also looking at your food. How do you digest certain foods? Sensitivities, looking at your diet nutrition profile to see for, gluten, celiac sensitivities, because that can definitely disrupt and create gut permeability which will directly affect the gut if you are eating foods that, you may not have severe gut issues or GI distress eating some of the, gluten, wheat, but it's causing leaky gut and it's causing disruption in your gut microbiome. So this is something where we take a look at, again, not just your genes, but your history. What's going on? How are you feeling? Looking at all these puzzle pieces, putting them together for this overall picture that is you, and then start making, the necessary changes to see if we can move that needle. So you were saying about, okay, taking probiotics, maybe taking prebiotics and doing this, and is it helping? Well, that is a great question because first of all, it can be a little difficult to parcel out just one change, because there's always things going on. But sometimes you are able to do that, especially if you take notes, use a journal. Not like you have to do this all the time, but be aware of the changes that you are making. How are you feeling? Also, that's your subjective. Okay, how are you feeling? Very important. But then we can also do some objective data testing. Having a gut 360 test. Let's actually look at the population.
Let's test your poop. Let's test your poop, folks.
Yes.
So we look at the DNA that might cause, you to have some predispositions or weaknesses. The environment might pull that trigger, but then how do you know? And that is really getting to the last question or the poll here anyways. It's hard to tell if supplements are making a difference. So we offer the Gut 360, which is going to look at your poop to see what interventions have been made, because it's not about the best probiotic, right? At the end of the day, Justin, I mean, there is no such thing, is there, about the best probiotic?
There's definitely not. And one of the things is, if let's say something like leaky gut has already begun and the solution we think is to just go ahead and add a probiotic, you're probably still going to have dysbiosis going on there. The bad bacteria, quote unquote, these opportunistic species that we talk about, E. coli and Candida and what have you, they make it harder for the beneficial species to go ahead and kind of take root in there. So we may need to do something to target the bad bacteria. We may need to do something extra to re-strengthen the gut lining. And that's the only way that the good bacteria are going to be able to properly take hold once again. Then within that, you've got all these various strains. Each one does a little something different. There's also HCl to consider. There's also enzymes to consider. The microbiome, the gut microbiome, that is so complicated. We don't know everything about it. And to think that we're going to just take a product and it's going to fix everything is pretty unlikely. We need to know the nature of the beast, so to speak. And I think that's the value of the Gut 360. We work with a company called Biome, and they also look at fungal species because there's a relationship there. So you can actually see if you have additional what is called proteolytic bacteria in the gut, which if you have too much of it is going to start to kind of make it more likely that the opportunistic species are going to take over. So again, it's about biosis. If you have dysbiosis, it's not just enough to add something in. We may need to add some fasting. We're going to need to look at your diet. We're going to need to bounce it off of the genes and find various ways to personalize it. Gut is really complicated, and it is 80% of your immune system, right? So this is relevant for all downstream effects as well.
Huge. So I would imagine everyone there that are listening tentatively this evening, they're seeing and hearing the value in personalization. It makes perfect sense, especially when we're talking about the ingredients that are intended to up or down regulate your genetic expression. But where do you go from here? And this is where our line of informed and inspired ingredients comes from. It was born out of thousands and thousands of genetic reports, none of which are one size fits all. They are siloed. And, if you've got issues with detoxification, there's a finished detox support. If you've got issues with methylation, there's a genetic inspired methylation support formula. And there's a whole bunch of others that you can find on our website. But this is really where custom compounded supplements come into play as well. So unlike over-the-counter options, custom formulations are tailored very specifically to your genetic needs, the dosage that you individually might require. It's a level of precision, that can be a real game changer for your health. So in that vein or in that context, why don't we answer some questions? Because I'm sure people have a bunch related to specific ingredients and or even specific genes, if some of them have even tested their 360. So Kira's starting by asking, hello, because it's a long one. So let's see. Each person's biological parts function differently. How does one know which bioavailable supplements are actually targeting the areas of the body that are lacking the nutrients, enzymes, peptides, and minerals? For example, Kira experiences muscle cramps in her legs after heavy exercise. Everyone automatically jumps to electrolytes, potassium, sodium, magnesium deficiencies. Who wants to go? Because she's making our point for us. One size fits all. A standard muscle cramp doesn't mean electrolyte deficiency. It often can. But her question really, in summary, is, well, how do we know which bioavailable supplements are actually targeting areas in the body that we need them to? So, Dr. Varden? I mean, methylation was a great first example, but there's so many others we can give.
I know. Yeah. And this is actually a question that I have more questions.
Right.
I would want to know, well, first of all, what does your diet look like? Are
Right.
you taking any of the supplements? Are you getting your trace minerals?
So I'm going to make it simple for Kay. Let's just, I'll be her and I'll answer like the patient. Let's imagine we get down to the point where her diet's great and exercise is balanced. She's doing her electrolytes. Let's just take magnesium as an example. Let's just think that red blood cell RBC, which you should ask your doctor for, but RBC magnesium is low. And the reason I'm going here is because, again, in context of supplementation, getting not only the right amount, which a lot of the genes we look at can inform, there are so many different types of magnesium and different ways in which we can use those different types. So maybe you can unpack that.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to mention about magnesium. This is really important to know the biochemical function of it, because when a muscle contracts, okay, it tightens up and contracts, the way that it is released is that a magnesium, well, actually it's ATP, but you need to have a magnesium to make it bioavailable for its work. ATP has to attach to that, the actin and myosin, to release it. And that's why they say magnesium is very good for muscle relaxation, because you are providing one of the cofactors that are necessary for that muscle contraction release. Okay. But again, it's like, okay, is this something that you need? Well, I mean, a quick and dirty way to check is add some magnesium in either topical or Epsom salt bath, or, is that giving you relief? Is that helping any? I know for me, I would get muscle cramps, especially in my lower legs at night. And yeah, those Charlie horses, they hurt. And when I started recognizing that not only was I, deficient in magnesium, but also my other trace minerals, I started taking bean minerals. And I also used their Instalight spray, which has a little bit higher magnesium in it. And within 30 seconds, it was gone. And it was a lifesaver. But now that I have adjusted my diet, making sure I take my bean minerals, making sure that I have a better spectrum of my nutrients, I don't get them anymore. So right. It's hard to determine sometimes, because it's not like it will always go away overnight.
Right.
This is a spectrum.
Right. Absolutely. So testing, knowing your numbers is key. Knowing your predisposition genetically is key. But magnesium oxide is very poorly absorbed. We know that compared to what you're probably talking about in terms of glycinate or bisglycinate or even citrate. But Justin, case in point, how are we using magnesium threonate as opposed to what Kira might be talking about in terms of muscle cramps and potentially magnesium helping for muscle cramps? Because this now will differentiate between not only the right amount, the right study, approach, how to test to know, but also how these are used differently to do different things.
Yeah, so different types of magnesium, which there is several, each one targets a little something different within the body. And as Bryce just mentioned, there's total differences in the absorbability of different types of magnesium. Threonate is definitely among the higher efficacy rate when it comes to the actual absorbability. And as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bryce, it is one of the ones that's used more towards alleviating muscle cramps. Am I correct on that one?
Well, yeah, and so there's the indication in the literature, anyways, that it's going to be much more likely to bypass the blood-brain barrier, right, and therefore potentially upregulate BDNF that we alluded to earlier. So glycinate, citrate, bisglycinate, these are probably going to have a lot more effects, to your point, in the musculoskeletal system. Whereas threonates allowed past the blood-brain barrier, which the body keeps in check, and these others aren't as much. So we're going to likely have more serological or blood upregulation in the brain for the threonate. So, I guess what I'm driving at here is not only is it dose, not only is it the absorbability or bioavailability, but it's the format. And whereas, to your point, Justin, where it's going to end up in the body, right? And, so this is a deep dive into, supplement quality. But Kira, get tested to know what these levels are. Red blood cell magnesium, I think, is probably one of the first places you want to start.
May I also add that, we focus a little bit more on magnesium, but there's other vitamins and nutrients that
for sure
are specific that actually work into muscle health. Your B vitamins, vitamin D, taurine, CoQ10, these things are very important. So, doing like a micronutrient test and, going through and having an assessment to see where you might be deficient or insufficient, because really that's what needs to be done, is bringing those deficiencies, insufficiencies to sufficiencies. And then you will find not just muscle cramping, but other things will start smoothing out and getting better.
Absolutely. Working one of our practitioners is going to be the way to go.
Yeah, because I would also add more than just supplements. Where you like anyone who's suffering from cramping, I would also say you should be foam rolling those muscles, right? You can use vibration plates. There's a thing called a Tim Tam, which is like one of those little massage guns that George St. Pierre's coach actually created, if you know who that is for our Canadians. You can be using PEMF. You can be getting deep tissue on the muscles as well. So supplements are, once again, one aspect of it, but I would zoom out, were I your coach, and say, let's do a bunch of this other stuff too. Because if your muscle fibers are knotted up, you're more likely to cramp. We need to get better blood flow into the muscle, and there's a bunch of different ways to do that beyond supplementation. So coaching is valuable as well.
Absolutely. Okay. Sarah's asking, I'd like to know if 5-HTP, 5-hydroxytryptophan, can be taken with antipsychotics such as Vraylar. Anyone want to stab it? I'm happy to answer that. In fact, why don't I just jump ahead?
Yeah.
Executive function, mood, and behavior, again, as I mentioned earlier, is one of those silos that we take, pride in. It can help identify beyond predisposition to addictions, attention deficit, sleep, circadian rhythm dysfunction, but generalized, mood and also motivation. A lot of, neurotransmitters, the biochemistry involved in how we sense and experience our life and the world around us is biochemical. Not all of it, but a lot of it is, and that's controlled by the genes that control the enzymes that basically control the speed of which these neurotransmitters sit around and do what they do, long, average, slow, or fast. We can often qualify almost like we do a separate test for this called pharmacogenomics, PGX testing. But there are some insights that we can get from our 360 that will tell you about this question and 5-HTP. Some of us, these, SSRIs, the typical serotonin reuptake inhibitor drugs, in this case of, cariprazine or whatever the generic name, the Vraylar. This is not just an SSRI. This has it works on dopamine and serotonin activity. So we look at dopamine activity, look at serotonin, noradrenaline, all the neurotransmitters. depending on, there's two genes we look at that are really important, Sarah. One is called the 5-HTTL-PR. The other one's the TPH2. So one's responsible for the amount of serotonin production. The other one's sort of, we do a good job at recycling neurotransmitters, all of us. So some better than others, is about how this serotonin goes home and gets recycled. So it's really actually important to use 5-HTP with caution, depending on your genes and the medication you're taking. So you're at risk when you're combining these, depending on your genes, for what's called serotonin syndrome. That doesn't mean you can't take a little bit. It's got to be metered. It's got to be under the guidance of a clinician who knows what they're doing. Because what you can do is add more of the ingredient 5-HTP to help your body make more serotonin. And this drug, in part, is going to leave more serotonin available, circulating, if you want to be really simplified about it, in the brain. So it can ultimately add up, pool, and become excessive. So you're going to experience certain symptoms in some instances when you combine these things of nausea, a real brain fog, almost flu-like symptoms, cramping. It's not good. Serotonin syndrome is not good. So you don't want to combine them without, knowing exactly what you're doing. Now, for others who aren't on antidepressive medications or medications that have this combination serotonin dopamine salvaging effect, I have found 5-hydroxytryptophan, even tryptophan, incredibly useful in my clinical practice when we see genes like 5-HTTL-PR and TPH2 to be suboptimal, especially if there's also simultaneously methylation issues. Because combining with the Bs that are necessary at the right format, some B6 is often added in there because that's a cofactor necessary, B12, you can see incredible results for mood, behavior, sleep, circadian rhythm, and so forth. So that would you guys have any other feedback on that?
I do, yeah. Just quickly, the gut 360 is an important thing to consider as well if you do have any kind of neurotransmitter issue going on. Serotonin being made predominantly in the gut. If we know that you've got some kind of dysbiosis there, that's something that I would look at as well. I mean, you may have a deficiency just based on gut problems, and perhaps your receptor itself is actually fine, which you can look at in your mood and behavior profile. I always couple that with the GSTM1. I look at the FUT2 and then the gut 360, and understanding the species in there can go a long way too with serotonin. So I wanted to add that.
Yeah, great. Perfect. Excellent point. And again, the pharmacogenetics test that we're running, the PGX, it sounds like when somebody says Vraylar to me, I'm like, they've been through a bunch of others. That's for sure. So to get to the point where that worked best for them. Pharmacogenomics is all about genetics to be able to understand what genes you possess that are most favorable in the face of certain prescription drugs. So what drugs match best back to your DNA? So if you want to skip, go collect $200 and not think too much about having to experiment through all these different pharmaceuticals and even nutraceuticals, by the way, pharmacogenetic testing is one of the best ways to go about that. Nicole is asking, what are the best labs to truly figure out deficiencies? Well, that's clear. It's the DNA company and the DNA 360. That's the genetics. But again, it's know your numbers. So bookend and in the intervention. So we'll talk about that and what labs use a truly optimal range to assess. I love the question because labs, Dr. Varden, I'll let you take this, but labs are not all about unique identification of uniqueness. It's these are ranges which are sometimes way too wide and or not within the world of sort of what we agree on in functional medicine optimal. If you want to get into what Nicole is asking.
Yeah, well, really, when it comes to optimal ranges, you really don't find that with the reference ranges that are offered. That's more so based on the person reading it and their knowledge, their experience, the research that has shown, okay, optimally, people who are in optimal health, this is where the ranges are. This is, so, and even then, those optimal ranges can be a little different, not by much, but a little bit, but it's definitely more narrow of a range than what you get for reference ranges. But I mean, she's asking, as far as like, what are the best labs? Well, there are comprehensive nutrient panels. Even some of the blood work that you get can still be useful, because especially when they have the vitamin D, your 25 hydroxy D levels. Oftentimes, doctors will add in markers for B12, folate. If you have an iron panel, they will test for magnesium, calcium, zinc, copper, electrolytes. So those kind of hit on some of the things that a previous question did with the muscle things. But when we're talking about functional medicine, nutritional testing, these really offer more in-depth panels that provide information on that nutrient status, metabolism. So, this is getting into things like the organic acid test. This evaluates various metabolic byproducts in the urine, okay? And that provides insight into nutrient deficiencies, gut health, mitochondrial function. SpectraCell has a micronutrient test, which is wonderful. And again, it does measure the functional levels of a wide range of micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, amino acids, all kinds of things. And
intracellular.
Yes, intracellular, because you can have nutrients, you can have these markers showing up in the bloodstream, doesn't mean that they are getting into the cells. That's really what is most important. So, this is really nice about that intracellular micronutrient testing. And of course, we've already talked about the Gut 360 test, and obviously using your DNA as that basis to say genetically, this is the way you process, this is what we do, and how can we marry the information from these diagnostic or these measurements, these labs, to your DNA, to what you are currently doing for diet and lifestyle.
Absolutely. DNA informs the custom compound formula and or the siloed approach that we use with our black label formulations. And that's so different than standard supplementation, because it's not a one size fits all. It's the right format, it's the right dose, it's safe, it's effective. We know where these ingredients come from. There's science and evidence behind them, and they're addressing your genetic needs. On top of which, it also informs what tests we should run that are functional, meaning the bookend. So what do? We test after we know your DNA. We often test Gut 360, an aging test, for example, a methylation clock, or these functional tests Dr. Varden described. Intervene with a custom formulation protocol, lifestyle and nutrition included, and then retest to know that these things are working. The drawbacks of trial and error over the counter options, which are endless. I got to be the first to admit, I know a lot about supplements and ingredients. I'm still daunted walking into your average health food store or supplement aisle, of your CVS or large, commercial chain store. And I think that there's huge long-term cost savings and health benefits of investing in high quality, custom tailored supplements. No one does this, but if there were very few, I teach my patients to. If you were to take everything that the average supplementer, even the biohacker is taking, you take that average to experienced supplementer, and you tell not the person that's taking a single multivitamin, maybe a little bit extra vitamin D and some probiotics that won't. But there's cost savings on if you're taking 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 bottles plus to consolidate highest quality ingredients at the right dose for you. I just can't. And not just cost savings, it's compliance, right? If you don't do this, you don't take these things, they don't work for you. So I find that with my patients that they're more likely to take the things that are indicated for them at the times of the day that they should be taking them, making it a lot easier. Justin, this is clearly a question for you. GSTT1 null. Please explain how to supplement glutathione in this instance.
Yeah,
it is tricky, right? I mean, it's tricky. Not everyone with glutathione genetic discrepancies, suboptimal, just wants to race and start taking intravenous glutathione to the moon.
Yeah, and it's one of those ones, right, where you look it up and it's like, oh, glutathione, master antioxidant. What would happen if I just dosed the crap out of my body with that? There must be a good result if I were to do that. That's where we look at the genes, right? Because GSTT1 is associated with the liver, right? That's the liver's primary job. It has a lot of jobs, but that's one of its primary jobs. And we measure it as a copy number variation, a CNV. So how many copies did you get from your parents? You can have 0, 1, or 2 copies. When you have 0, it's considered a null. We call it a double null. So remembering here that genes are instruction manuals. It tells your body what to do. Were you with 0 copies of GSTT1 to take a big old dose of glutathione every day, thinking it's a good idea, your body doesn't have the instructions for what to do with that glutathione. So one of the problems with that is that when your body can't process glutathione, what it does is it binds to different minerals and it starts robbing your body of minerals. And now we've got a whole nother problem. So what I would suggest, among other liver detox strategies, right? You can use like TUDCA. There's a lot of great ingredients that aid liver detox beyond glutathione. For the glutathione itself, your best bet is to rely on those precursors, like the building blocks of glutathione that Dr. Laura already mentioned earlier in the call, right? Glutathione is made up of N-acetylcysteine and glutamates. We have alpha lipoic acid, selenium, even glutamine to an extent can help with that. Getting the glycine in there, right? Which like collagen has a lot of glycine. So there's little dietary sources even that you can include. But that's going to give your body what it needs to make a little bit more of its own glutathione without overloading the pathway by just taking a giant dose of glutathione daily. Other things like cold exposure actually upregulates glutathione pathways. How about that? So if you have an optimal UCP1 gene and you can go ahead and do cold exposure, there's actual lifestyle tendencies that you could have to improve your glutathionization overall. I would also look at the GSTM1 as well as the GSTP1 to see the efficacy of the rest of your body there as well. But GSTT1 null, definitely rely on those precursors and it'll help you quite a bit there.
Okay. And I would add to that, my 2 cents is there are some products on the market, ingredients of glutathione and even precursors to glutathione production that are going to work better than others. And the literature is quite clear. There's about 34 or so well-done studies available on PubMed. Really only 4 or 5 of which, if you take a standard glutathione, does anything measurable to intracellular glutathione. Like, to your point, there's a lot of our cellular mechanisms for which manufacture glutathione in the face of environmental stressors or our diet and all these different things. But supplemental glutathione generally for GST null variants doesn't have a great evidence to support intracellular upregulation beyond homeostasis, which essentially means you might get it in there, might be extracellular, might be doing some good, but it may not get into where it needs to get. So for these individuals, we also pair and double down with the ingredients, alpha lipoic acid and acetylcysteine, selenium to help them make more, and a type of reduced form of glutathione that shows a better cross-cellular membrane upregulation, which is fancy for it's getting to where it needs to get and do the job it needs to do. So this is for you, Dr. Laura. This is a question from Deborah who says, if your genes say that you're likely to be deficient in vitamin D, but your vitamin D blood test says you're high in vitamin D, what could or should you do? Does the genes, could this be genetic, meaning that you don't process vitamin D properly? Is it too high in your bloodstream? So unpack this VDRGC CYP 2R1 story for us here, because that's what Deborah needs to know.
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, when you say that your blood test says you're high, I ask, what's the value? What's the number? Because again, this is getting back to those reference ranges. They'll say 30 to 100 nanograms per milliliter. But that's a pretty wide range. And in literature, and what I have found, personally, and, speaking with a lot of other doctors and people that they have worked with, that really that more beneficial health level is actually starting at 50 nanograms per milliliter and really working into optimal. And some, clinicians like this, it may shift a little bit in it. I prefer to have my clients optimally between like 80, 70 to 90 nanograms per milliliter. So what is your number specifically, because the meaning of which of saying high, you know, that's debatable. So, but let's say, gosh, let's say you are, you know, way above 110. Okay. Obviously, highly unlikely, but let's say it's really high, or your doctor's like, no, taking too much. But your genes, your pathway is not very good. So Dr. Wild was saying CYP2R1. This is the gene that converts vitamin D2 to D3, the bioavailable form that, you know, we actually can utilize. The GC gene, it's also the VDBP, vitamin D binding protein. This is the transport. How well do you take the D3 and bring it to the tissues and cells? And then you have your VDR gene. This is the, excuse me, vitamin D receptor. These are actually the receptors on the cells that allow that D3 to then enter and do its job. How well do you do that? Well, if that's dysregulated, but you've got high values, well, then obviously you're doing something right to get it and utilize it and get it in there. So, and I would think if your values are that high and your pathway is dysregulated, that you're supplementing. You've got to be supplementing if it's that high. So it's maybe just take it down some, you know, and again, depending on what the levels are, that would determine what levels would be most appropriate for you. And I'm doing a lot of, you know, hypothetical, because I don't know what your values are. I don't know your particular pathway. So that's what I would say, is that it's not necessarily that, you know, there is something with your genes that's making it too high. It's just that the supplementation that you're doing is obviously getting it up there, but where is up there? What is too high? Oh, you know, I wanted to circle back and let people know, when I was talking about testing, micronutrient testing, all the different kinds of testing that I was mentioning earlier, we offer that here at the DNA Company. If you are working with any of us, or if you know, want to become a client of ours, we can order any of those tests for you, keep it in-house, keep it, you know, the information, you know, say you're not sure exactly which test that you need or that you should have. Working with one of us, we can actually tell you, based on your information, based on your genes, going, okay, we think this would be the most appropriate, whether it's a, you know, oat test, or whether it's the micronutrient test, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And then we can actually get that, excuse me, we can actually get that ordered for you. So I just wanted to let you all know that it's not like you have to go out and find someone, you know, to, you know, order these tests for you, that we can do that in-house.
Yep. Excellent point. Cindy's asking about her methylation pathway on behalf of her husband. MTR is GG, MTR is AG. So he's taking adenosylcobalamin. This is the subtle inference as to how we make some of these decisions. She's also saying, though, can he take hydroxycobalamin, given methylcobalamin and adenosylcobalamin have different rules in the body, which is true. And how does a person with her husband's gene cope with the absence of methylcobalamin? So I'll take that. I'll just say, yes, I think your husband would be okay with hydroxy. It might be sort of that intermediate. So what we like to do is determine. So long story short, because I want to get through as many of these answers as possible, the conversion may not be as efficient as taking methylcobalamin directly, but with somebody with these MTR variants, hydroxycobalamin is used sort of as that, without overstimulating, I suppose I'd like to say. At the end of the day, though, when we find very specific variations with MTR, and of course, if that's paired with SHMT1 variations where we see the folate discrepancy and we recommend folinic acid, the most powerful interventions are solving for these discrepancies and making recommendations for folinic acid paired with either adenosylate or adenosylate and hydroxycobalamin. So here's the thing, know your numbers. These are all variations on the theme, depending on your genes, sequences, and so forth. But this is where, I mean, conventional says homocysteine is not relevant of a marker anymore for, like, or at least it's not up there as it used to be considered or revered as an inflammatory marker for inflammation derived cardiovascular disease. I think it's an amazing surrogate marker for this pathway, though, because obviously looking at his serological homocysteine and his overall response to hydroxycobalamin will be crucial in determining whether it's good for him. Bottom line. So that's helpful. Jillian's asking, hi, my son has the MTHFR in the A1298C. We test for 2. These are zip codes, postal codes if you're in Canada, as to where we're talking about the variation. He's taking methotrexate, right, and Remicade for autoimmunity. So I gave him 5-methyltetrahydrofolate and B12, and I rotate with an iron supplement. My question is, should he continue like that forever? How do I know when to stop? Also, is iron and folate the same thing? Oh, certainly not. Iron and folate is not the same thing. You want to take a first stab at that, Justin? First of all, just say methotrexate, regardless as to your genes, is going to cause a folic acid deficiency, but it's going to make it even more impactful if you're kind of suboptimal in the methylation pathway. So certainly during the duration, your doctor would advise us as well of him taking methotrexate, which may in fact be long-term. Remicade is a different beast altogether, doesn't really influence folate deficiencies. But let's just assume he's got that MTHFR issue, and they know more than just that gene. They now know SHMT1, because maybe they don't, but they should. Now, if they know SHMT1 runs awry, what would your advice be, Juz?
Yeah, so that's why we look at it like that, right? Because MTHFR is just that first step in the whole relay race. If you guys didn't see that particular webinar that Bryce and I did about the methylation cycle, we went super duper deep about the entire pathway. If I didn't know the rest of those, I'd be hesitant to recommend any type of B vitamin, because we need to know which one is appropriate. So folate, it can be, there's folic acid that's pretty much involved in every carbohydrate you can buy over the market, and we get a lot of toxicity out of having too much folic acid. Folate in and of itself is just B9, and what we look at is we look at the SHMT1 gene to know if you should go ahead and add the methyl group or not. To Bryce's point earlier, homocysteine would be one of those markers that I would keep an eye on as far as if you want to continue doing the cycling approach. If there's not a good balance between homocysteine and methionine, then that's a good indicator that the methylation cycle on a zoomed in perspective is not going particularly efficiently. Iron and folate are totally different, right? Folate would be a B vitamin, and then iron is totally separate. So I would keep those separate in your mind. But the homocysteine levels would help you to know if your current cycling approach is actually efficacious. That's kind of the main thing I would look at. Do either of you have anything to add to that one?
Well, and I think I would love to bring Gihan, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, live, because I think Dr. Varden could probably add some nuance and some additional, with some more information, maybe some additional insights to this. So, if we can get Gihan live, that would be maybe fun, because we're always looking for great questions like this, and can be further informed by, some medical history, any additional things. So I don't know if we can bring her in or him. Apologize about the sun, at least. Maybe we can get them live. And while we work on that, I missed a question from Carol, who says she's low in zinc and iron concurrently. I'd be interested to know how she's low in zinc. We do define that on the DNA 360. And her body's not absorbing it, which has been triggering her to get not to be able to taste, smell. We saw a lot of that during COVID, while also having a gene expression where I'm not able to feel satisfied when I eat food. What would the recommendation be? So as we potentially get this live question, what would your at least top line recommendations be for Carol, Dr. Varden?
Actually, taking this at face value, if she is low in zinc and iron and has some problems with absorbing it, let's bypass the gut as much as possible and get these nutrients in. So looking for a liquid, oftentimes they'll have, iron liquid form for better absorbability, try to allow it to be held in the mouth, under the tongue, so there's more absorption through the oral cavity, but also looking into transdermal vitamins. Allow that absorption in the skin into the body, again, bypassing the gut, especially if you are having gut issues, major dysbiosis with your microbiome, or parasites or something else, because they eat first. I mean, you could be eating a perfect organic diet and everything else, but if you have, some of these parasites, they're absorbing and they're taking your nutrients. They're not letting you absorb it. So, let's try to bypass that. So that's where I would jump to.
Yeah. Clinically, and this is available over the counter in most health food stores, there's something called the zinc tally test. Well, first of all, I'd ask your doctor to run zinc copper. These always go in tandem, and there's a ratio, relatively 30-1. Most of us aren't low in copper. Some of us can be because of PVC piping, and we're not any longer exposed to the copper, from piping and or our diet. But anyway, if it's out of ratio, blood work can discern that. And our practitioners can requisition that kind of blood work. But there's also something called the zinc tally test, which is, it's a solution, again, over the counter at the health food store. You put it in your mouth and you swish it around, spit it out. It's zinc sulfate. So it's a surrogate marker. So to be careful with this advice. But if you are experiencing an incredibly frothy, chalky taste on your mouth, you may in fact be a little zinc low. If it's a terrible, like rotten egg sulfur taste, you are in fact likely to be low, to be confirmed on blood work. But that's called a zinc tally test. What happens if you're low is your body wants the zinc, it absorbs it, and it leaves behind the sulfate. So zinc sulfate unbinds, and you taste this terrible egg sulfur smell or taste. So that's a very easy way to sort of at-home test for your zinc levels. Seems like she's already been confirmed low. So then that would be applicable to her in terms of the action. But this is for other people who might question if they're low. And genes tell you, we have ways in which to discern that in our 360 test. Nina's asking, can you speak to cycling NAC, which is N-acetylcysteine, and other supplements that should be cycled? I like that. I like that question because not everything is necessarily to be taken every single day, twice a day for the rest of your life. And I know Justin is probably biting and chomping at the bit to answer that question. That's so relevant to amino acids. It's relevant to hormones. It's relevant to a lot of ingredients. But how about NAC?
Yeah, so I'll explain my approach to supplements in general here, just because it's a relevant talking point. I put, for myself as well as my patients, I put my own supplementation protocol into 3 categories. I go, this category is for upregulating a pathway that our genes suck at, right? This is a job that just isn't getting done. And these ones I'm going to be on most of the time. Then the second category is ones that I just completely cycle. I'll do for 2 months on, 2 months off. And then the third category is like more for the fun of it, like nootropics, something to have on hand, a lactase enzyme for if I'm going to have something with lactose in there, something like that. Because people ask me these questions all the time. So I put them in categories. Even the first one, let's say I have 0 copies of GSTT1, like the previous question. NAC is one of the things that I'll use in that first category. So I'm going to be on it most of the time because this particular gene isn't doing its job. It's not even there if you have a null, variant. So what you could do is you could take NAC for a period of time, understanding that it's going to do this job and help to kind of fill in the gap that your gene isn't doing. Then what you can do is come off of it and support your glutathionization in other ways as kind of a bridge, an intermediate, right? So like, for example, I mentioned TUDCA earlier. If I'm going to reduce something that's going to help me with glutathionization, then I'm going to go ahead and jump on something else as a bridge that's a totally separate ingredient, totally separate pathway, but still giving me support in this suboptimal pathway that I need, right? It allows you to jump from one thing to the next. You're still cycling, but you're offering different support, right? You might need just better hydration for that period of time that you cut out the NAC. You might need a little bit higher ORAC foods and just try to, supplement that way, have better antioxidants in your diet, right? So know that if we're going to come off of a support mechanism, you can always put something else in there in place of it and then jump back on the NAC after that. everything should probably be cycled. There's very few supplements that I don't at least take a break on now and then. Do you guys have any different approach? Like Dr. Laura, do you do it separately or?
Well, I mean, again, I kind of manage what the person is doing, how they are feeling, what the current situation is. But I love the way that you offer that information and the way that you go about that. And I'll tell you, I take vitamin vacations that, just like take a break from them every once in a while. And sometimes I'll do it just to go, do I still need this? How do I feel? And I'll tell you, there are times that I'm like, yeah, I definitely need to be on those. I definitely felt better. But, sometimes I'll stop something. I don't feel anything different. And so I'm like, okay, my body doesn't need that anymore. And just kind of watch things again, doing that. How do I feel? But then also checking in with blood work and other tests. Because like Dr. Bryce, what you were saying, we don't always need to have everything all the time forever. Our bodies change, our microbiomes change, situations change. So we need to be malleable and dynamic to that.
Yeah, I think we could even bring it back to the vitamin D, which I simply use because everyone's familiar with it. Okay, so we have genetic predispositions to being able to absorb, transport, and receive for use at the cellular receptor level vitamin D. Each of us are different. Some of us much better than others. Darker skinned individuals less able to absorb purposely. Otherwise, there'd be there'd be toxicity. And this is an evolutionary perspective, anthropological. Living at the equator for millions of years, you get adapted to buffering the amount of vitamin D you take into the system. But even if you're like me, very white, glow in the dark, and I do need more vitamin D and happen to have, circulatory vitamin D genes that are unfavorable. Guess what? Nature still brings dark, gloomy, rainy days. So to best emulate nature, you take into consideration the genes you have, along with bookended testing. And again, the interventions, you want to regularly check your vitamin D levels, your 25-OHD, but to take it every single day, in my opinion, probably isn't necessarily emulating nature as best as possible. If you have genetic discrepancies with vitamin D, the majority of days, you probably need it the majority of days. Most importantly, of course, during where you live, if you live where I live, north of 40, during the winter and even the spring and fall. Maybe not as much in the summer, maybe not. So I think there's legitimate. It's a great question. I think it depends on what is the ingredient. I think it depends on regulatory factors like homocysteine or like detoxification, which can be balanced and maybe even super. So I think there might be a homeostasis factor here. I think that if you took NAC 3 times a day for 10 years straight, you might downregulate your own ability to manufacture glutathione. But I think if you have glutathione dysregulation from a genetic perspective, that it's probably not going to be, a bad thing. Depends on the person. That's what we're getting at. Individual, not, one-stop shop amount for everybody. Cindy's asking an acid test. I'm assuming she's referring to an oats. Showed that she has a high need for antioxidant support. GSTT1, this is her genes now. GSTT1 null, superoxide dismutase TT, so she's that 70% reduced. Glutathione peroxidase CC. What's the best antioxidant support for her? Well, it's what we recommend in the detox support. I mean, that's what we're going to refer to. And we're using a reduced glutathione. We're using N-acetylcysteine, alpha-lipoic acid, and a little bit of selenium. Do you guys have any other? That's available on our website, thednacompany.com.
And mitochondrial optimizer.
Yes, of course. Right.
In her case.
SOD2, right, being the TT, right. And so the theory here is not even theory. It's very well evidenced in the literature. Let's talk about mitochondrial function and support. SOD2, when you're a TT variant like you, Cindy, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is help to protect against the oxidative stress on your mitochondria. And what does that mean? That means shielding it to some degree. It means helping it divide better. So because mitochondria divide and they multiply intracellularly, there's more in your, brain and heart tissues that are constantly active, never rest. But at the end of the day, you also want to see more downstream ATP, the currency of energy production. So that's where we went to the formula and we said, how do we help it divide? PQQ. How do we actually increase downstream more upregulation of ATP? That's any of the NAD precursors, which we use best-in-class ingredients in there. And then coenzyme Q10 in the right format, ubiquinol, is going to help shield it from the oxidative stress. So that's, the three sort of pronged or trifecta approach. Justin, here's one for you. Please say the names of the amino acids in glutathione and how to get them.
Yeah, so glutamate, glycine, and cysteine. Those are the three predominant ones in there. And like I say, I mean, you can do a lot of stuff to increase your glutathione pathway aside from that, but that's where the coaching process comes in. But those would be the three.
And Dr. Varden, Nicole's asking, what can be the steps to help detoxifying lead, mercury, short-term PBHG, lead, mercury, or any other heavy metals? We have experts at the DNA company, actually specialize in this, right?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, Lynn Angel is amazing working in mercury detoxification. So, I mean, obviously, heavy metals, this is something that it's not something I can just give you, oh, do X, Y, Z, here. This is something that would need to be followed through. This is something that I strongly would recommend working with a professional, with someone to walk you through that type of therapeutic detoxification protocol. It is not something I would say, just jump into yourself and do this. I don't recommend
Absolutely.
that. So I'm not going to get into details on how to do that, but just saying we have people for you.
Absolutely. Deborah's asking regarding magnesium, could you take the different formulations at different times or different formulations multiple times a week? I'm assuming she's referring to format. So once again, I'd refer back to knowing your numbers. We have some inference with the genetics. And certainly, again, we can requisition red blood cell magnesium, which is intracellular magnesium levels. Most of us are actually low. We also test for vitamin A. We didn't cover this, but I think vitamin A is going to become, maybe in the next 5 or 10 years, the new vitamin D. But when it comes to soil rotation issues and how we use food to sort of cover the majority of micronutrients, which just doesn't happen because of soil deficiencies, we need to supplement, and we need to supplement more with certain formats given the objective. So the 3 and 8 we discussed earlier has a better blood-brain barrier entry, so that it can be used to affect changes when it comes to mood, behavior, executive function. Citrate, bisglycinate, malate, all these different other formats, probably more indicated for musculoskeletal activity. But can you take those together? Sure. You can take them together throughout the day. Generally speaking, people take and supplement with magnesium, glycinate, bisglycinate, malate, citrate at the end of the day before bed. It also helps to relax and sedate and help with the muscles. To Dr. Varden's earlier point, energy production is responsible for over 300 enzymes in the body, and many of which create energy for you, and the currency of energy, which is ATP. That's the citric acid cycle. But 3 and 8 probably best taken a couple of times a day, especially when it's indicated through our DNA 360 test. When it comes to the BDNF being either an AG or an AA. Betty's asking, my profile said to take folinic acid. I'm taking the Seeking Health protocol. I was using the usual B12 and folate for many years. Since I switched, I have not been sleeping. Interesting, Dr. Varden.
Yeah. This would be interesting because the first thing that comes to mind, you're not sleeping, maybe because your methylation pathway may be working, you're releasing toxins, and there could be a release going on that your body is trying to work through, and that's affecting your sleep or how well you're sleeping. And this is just one hypothetical. This is where I have more questions. I would want to look into, let me see your DNA, where are the weak points, but also looking at maybe there's some other changes that have gone on, as well.
I would agree entirely. Sometimes I find clinically when you hit the big red reset button, it's not always a bad thing that temporarily, this is very important to understand, temporarily things improve, at least metabolically, so much to the point where all of a sudden you're waking up. That's like a newfound, energy, if you will. Maybe that's over simplified, but that's sometimes, as we call this, I don't care, like healing crisis, Herxheimer, whatever you want to call it, not related to toxins, but sometimes shifts occur where neurotransmitters are digging a whole new, they're on scene in a way that they've never been. So that's not always a bad thing. You got to see you got to see a clinician to unpack that for sure, Betty.
But sometimes it's letting us know we're over the target.
Yeah, that's true.
We're actually making things,
Yeah, no, possibly for sure. I mean, listen, just because something is indicated genetically and we've even tested you low doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be a perfect fit. Biochemistry, if you saw my wall here, which is the entire human biochemical cascade in a nutshell, it's dizzying. So it's not easy, even when you're well versed in this stuff. But that's why I said, under the guidance of a clinician to work through it, I think is the same as you were alluding to. I got to say, this is probably the last question that we'll get to today before we wrap. And that is if someone does not bind properly, that's the VDR, the vitamin D receptor gene, then does the actual issue lie in the functioning of the kidneys? Who wants at that? I don't know that I can certainly say that it's not the functioning of the kidneys. There's vitamin D receptors on all or most of our cells, not every single cell in our body, but almost all. But kidney function, I don't know, Dr. Vard, I don't really have a good answer for that, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that there's a little jumping around or misunderstanding of what we were talking about for the vitamin D pathway, because that's the between the CYP2R1, okay, that's the conversion of D2 to D3 that happens in the liver. D3, the storage form, gets brought over to the kidney when the D3 gets turned into the bioactive form.
Calcitrol, right.
Exactly. So now it gets, continually transported, but it's getting transported to all of the tissues in the cells, because nearly every single cell in the body has a vitamin D receptor. We have to remember that vitamin D is actually a hormone. Okay. And it helps to regulate the expression of more than 2,500 genes that are involved in energy metabolism, hormone signaling, mineral homeostasis, chromosomal proteins, oncogenes, all of these different things. So when we consider that, it's the receptors on these cells.
Right.
How well are they functioning? Do you have an appropriate amount that can then help bind the D3? So it's not so much the functioning of the kidneys that works with the vitamin D receptor.
Right. Yeah, and so the kidneys play an important role at the activation level, as you said. And here's what's really important: if kidney function, and that's really EGFR and some other functional assessments, and VDR binding and the CYP2R1 are impaired, that's way more significant issues, that you want to monitor, obviously. As Justin mentioned earlier, supporting those pathways involved in the activation and even in the binding involve magnesium and K2. So you kind of have to, once again, consult a healthcare professional to oversee all of this and get you at the sort of perfect levels of all of these things, and even monitor them, especially if EGFR, which, by the way, is very ethnically driven. African Americans tend to have lower glomerular filtration rates or kidney function. So this does play a role more for that cohort and population, which is the whole story of genes, right? I mean, it's an ethnic thing. It's where do I live in the world? It's an environment thing. And nothing is right or wrong or good or bad about your genetic profile. It just is what it is. And we're all unique and we're all different, and we can manage them often by using ingredients found in supplements that are evidence-based, which is the story of this evening's webinar. So time for final thoughts, guys.
I have one just to kind of piggyback on that as well. I also recommend people look at your nitric oxide genes as well, right? Because if you have that suboptimal VDR and let's say you overdo it, the vitamin D is likely going to store in your adipose tissue. And what a lot of people don't know is that nitric oxide plays a role in the releasing of internally created vitamin D. So if you have a totally suboptimal NOS3 gene as well, you're that much more likely to not be able to kind of release the vitamin D that you have in your body already. It's a hormone, like Dr. Varden said. So we want to make sure that the body's able to activate it via the magnesium and what have you. And just know that nitric oxide also plays a role in that. So in your cardiovascular report, look at your NOS gene and see what that's up to these days.
For sure. Dr. Varden, before we close it out, and we have some exciting news, by the way, so stick around to the very end. I've got something very exciting to tell everybody before you sort of switch out. But Dr. Varden, any last thoughts?
I would just like to say thank you all for being here and for your interest. And I hope that we have provided you with some information and the necessity of being very particular with the supplements that you choose, how you go about taking these supplements, the correct blend. And, you know, this is the underlying reason why we have created the Black Label. You know, so, you know, if you are interested, please contact us. We will be more than happy to help you determine what the correct blend is for you. If you want to work with one of us, you know, obviously we can do a deeper dive, really get into what is necessary for you. Remember, this is personalized.
I love it. You have the power to take control of your health. You can't change your DNA. It's what mom and dad have dealt you, but you can certainly manage genetic expression. That's the DNA company's slogan. Whether you're looking to optimize sleep, we talked about, boost detoxification, just improve overall well-being. The right supplements tailored to you, the right dose for you, based on your genetic makeup, which is unique, can make a, I don't know, world of difference. We know it. We see it every day. So here's the exciting news. If you're ready to take this next step in personalizing your health, obviously the DNA 360 is at your disposal. But we encourage you to check out the latest issue of the DNA Tox Digest. And here you're going to find a real in-depth insight into the topics of the month. So again, DNA 360 to discover your genetic blueprint. But if you're not quite there, you're not ready to push the go button on the testing, just, you know, subscribe to the DNA Talks Digest. It'll happen one day, and we can't wait for that to happen for you. So thanks for joining us this evening. Here's to a smarter, healthier you living through personalized supplementation. Adios,
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.